Traditionally, watercolorists have started their painting up at the top of their paper and worked their way down from the sky to the ground. I think one trick that helps me take some pressure off of starting out perfect and having a beautiful painting that I've spent hours and hours on and then wreck it at the last minute with a foreground is to start with the foreground first. Let's start with some wet paper, and I'm going to have this get super juicy. I'm going to really load my brush now with sepia and Prussian blue. Those are two colors that I really often use in foregrounds, and I love some of the things that happen with them. Now I'm going to just make some random paint come down in this foreground area. I'm thinking there's a whole painting above this, and I'm going to clean this off. Prussian has got a staining of quality to it, so I might want to lift some of that up with my rag. And this is kind of now defining my foreground a little better. I'm going to drop in some more sepia. I've got mostly Prussian in here, but I'm dropping in some more sepia. And what I want you to notice is that I'm going to splatter a little bit of sap green mixed with that sepia, mixed with that Prussian blue. And these are super dark when they're all put together. And I'm creating a bit of a zigzag in my foreground here. I'm letting that bleed up there. That could become part of my overall look. It could be the trees or something in my painting. Now, I'm going to, first of all, just get some juicy pigment down. And then let's take some blotter paper. This is paper I bought that's just, they sell it as blotter paper. Back in the old days, it would be on people's desks and they would blot their fresh ink writing or their letters with. And I'm just going to tear a little chunk of this. I've made it sort of like a rock shape. And this sucks up pigment. When I push this down on my paper, it's going to pick up some of that pigment and it's just soaked it into the paper. If I make some interesting shapes with this, it could look like rocks in my foreground. I'm just pressing it, creating sort of a little bit of randomness, but also thinking about that this is sort of like a rocky hillside area in the foreground of my painting. I'm going to take my misting bottle now and hit this, keep it kind of moving, kind of keep it wet. I'm going to take some salt, and I use my kosher coarse salt with this, and I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of salt in this area of the center of interest here. And I might take a sponge. I'm using a natural sponge this time. And when I press that in, I might make some interesting kinds of patterns. What I'm really trying to have here is some unpredictable, interesting patterns that are difficult for people to tell how in the world you did it. I'm going to take my toothbrush now and try putting a little bit of raw sienna into this mixture. This has a little bit of medium yellow in it that I had from a previous puddle. Let's try a little bit of that in there. And now I'm knocking out a lot of that pigment, but I'm keeping some of it in so that I can just speckle in some of that lighter pigment into this rocky foreground. Whoa, I'm getting a bloom going up there. That's part of what I mean by doing it first, because it's very unpredictable, but when that dries, I might be able to figure out something to do with it. Okay, I'm going to take my rigger and get some of my mix of Prussian blue, sap green, and sepia, and maybe just bring in some darker pigment right around the edge of where I'm thinking of creating this rocky kind of hillside here. These are pretty vague sort of rock-like shapes that I'm drawing in. I'm thinking of geometry. I'm thinking of making them what I notice when I look at rocky areas on the side of the trail. And I don't want to overdo this because I will find things in this later. But I think what I'd like to do is splatter some darker pigment in as well, not just that lighter pigment, but now I'm going to go grab some of that sepia and some Prussian with my toothbrush and darken this in. So I have some darker speckles in these rocks here. Mist it a little bit. I have a tremendous amount of water that is pooled up right here, and I can tear another piece of blotter paper. You can tear this so that it creates rounded kind of rock-like, boulder-like shapes, and maybe I could lay that one in like so and suck up some of that extra water that's in there. Down here maybe. I'm just playing around, and that's what's going to create a beginning for a painting that is so loose and unpredictable that I might find I can make something pretty intriguing out of it. I do think that one run that found a little depression in my paper, a little low spot, would be pretty tough to figure out how to incorporate that into my painting. So let's take that out of there, just blotting up a little bit so that when I use my misting bottle, it will kind of fill some of those spots in. Okay. And be a little bit more lifting out of here, sort of random rock shapes. And maybe splatter a little bit more. Lean towards the blue this time. We leaned towards the sepia last time, and let's see what if I get some nice Prussian stuff going down here. Okay, I'm going to let this dry for just a bit and then maybe wash it under the sink, and we'll see what we end up with. Okay, it's partially dry, not totally dry. If you're fortunate enough to have a little spray nozzle over at a sink, you can wash this off now. I'm going to gently wash over the whole thing, and you'll find that some spots that were still wet are going to just get washed away. The salt got washed away, and I need to now let this dry. So after I've washed this off in the sink, I have to take a step back and look at it, see what I've got. This is an experimental foreground. That means you've taken a lot of risks. You were loose and juicy and taking unpredictable steps of blotting out. I've got a few little spots of pigment on some of my light areas that I might want to clean up with some clean water and just a gentle rub with my 1/2-inch flat brush. I take my rag, and I kind of keep my rag handy now because I'm going to use it to blot things up too. If you think about this created texture, you're off to a good start. What it needs so it jumps out at your viewer is some more variety, some more contrast. So I'm going to go into some areas and make them a little more cleaned up and whiter, lighter, a lighter value. Let's go along this edge with our 1/2-inch flat brush. Gently with clean water, I can just massage that area there, and it's going to create the face of a rock that is a little cleaner than what I got with the randomness of blotting paper and spraying it later. And see, I can get a pretty strong highlight by doing that. Maybe go across the top of this boulder here, over to this one, and then down. So I can darken, I can lighten using that technique. And now I'm going to try darkening by just adding some pigment, okay? So you can help yourself define how you want this foreground to look, how you want the little rocky area in the front of your painting to start to show off and create that design. I can also now add some darker darks, and I'm going to stay within my same spectrum so I maintain the harmony of this painting, but I think I'm going to clean up some of this by maybe adding a darker rock in front of these others here, and in these pockets up in here I can darken some of this area. This looks sort of like a second rock that I could go around. This is all just really kind of playing around, so there's not a right answer to this. That's too straight of a line, so I'll need to lift some of that paint out. And I can certainly take my rigger and go back in here and start to define some of these boulders like this. Some of the faces of these rocks would have more shading on them, maybe this darker bottom side, and I can get that in there with my rigger. You're the boss, and you're making rocks wherever you want them to be here. Now, I think I can just give you this quick indication that I'm going to be putting some kind of a landscape into this painting, but I've started with such an experimental start that I'm not worried about at least messing this foreground up. It's about what it's going to be at this point. And now I can go in here on the top part of these rocks and throw in some sort of landscape. Let's mist this and soften this area down here. Nothing is stopping you from going back and using your blotter paper again, or using your 1-inch flat thirsty brush to suck up some pigment in some spots. This area that's still wet, and down at the bottom I can see another area that's still pretty wet. If I go rinse this off again in the sink, those parts will wash away. Oftentimes the edge of them will still remain because that part's kind of started to dry already. Let's go see what happens if we take it to the sink. And you'll see that the areas that were still pretty wet, mostly wash away in the gentle rain. Now let's see what happens when we let it dry. Okay, as this dries, I can take a look at my mess and sort of think about what I might want to do with it. The joy of this is that you're going to create some things that are very unexpected, particularly down in these rocky areas where it's the way that the paint dried that is determining how it's kind of was out of your control, but it's created these different textures, different shapes that are unexpected. I can go back in and kind of try to define things a little bit better. It's up to you. You're going to have to decide how much of this you want to just leave and how much you want to mess with it. When in doubt, stop before you think that it's done. But it's also hard not to fiddle with it a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to just define these trees a little bit better. Notice that I sucked up some of the paint and created negative trunks, negative branches by using my half-inch flat brush with clean water, and I lifted some paint out. It helps. Remember, variety means you try some of everything. So I've got some negative painting. Now I'm going to do some positive. I'll put a trunk in that's going to go behind here and maybe some branches that are positively painted, not just negative. So, and then I'm using my rigger so that I can get quite fine up here at the top of this tree where the branches really thin out to be very twig-like. And you might want to spot in, maybe using a little bit more green, spot in some leaves. This is sort of grayish, bluish green. Some areas where there's a little bit more leaves, something up there. Splatter a little bit up there. I'm just using my rigger and I'm pulling it on the sideways, so it does weird stuff that I don't really have as much control over. But I'm keeping it in the realm of the crown of that tree so that it stays sort of in the right area to suggest that tree's got some foliage on it. And where it blends into this tree, I'm going to obscure some of that. I don't really know what's going on down there, so I'll throw a little bit of Prussian blue in there to confuse the situation and leave it at that. I could put some super dark stuff down in here because that's really the darkest spot of my painting. I'm going to leave some rock below it. So I think you might be able to see what I'm doing there by recognizing I've got a light colored rock here, and then I left a medium, and now I've got super dark behind it. And it might help define this whole area a little bit if I put some structure in there, like possibly a fence or something to help define this landscape. And that little touch of architectural detail, like a fence, might help make this sing out a little bit more. I start usually by putting some posts in. I try to keep them roughly staggered about evenly, and I don't make them sticking straight into the earth because this looks like pretty rocky land here to me. And so I'm going to actually, let's cover up that trunk so that this rock here will be in front, but maybe that one. But there might be a fence post over, let's see where this one's going to be, right in here. And down here maybe. And then you can draw a rail across, but it can be pretty crude. This suggestion is all it takes for your viewer to say, oh, I see what's going on here. And maybe in the main area where I've done a little bit more detail work, I'll put it. Looks like there's a path maybe up through these rocks where I could have a spot where the fence detail has a couple extra rails. Okay, and what happens over there? That's off in the misty distance. Okay, it's not going to take a whole lot more to add a little spark of interest to this painting. I have the warmth of the painting comes from that sepia that I originally used in my rock mixture. And I'm going to kind of go back into my raw sienna to kind of warm that up even a little bit more. I can see that warm color down in these rocks, and I do like that. And I think I want a little bit of warmth in kind of coming up maybe in a bit of a pattern, a little bit of a triangle like I usually tell you about, that gives me a sense of design right in there, creating sort of a triangular bit of warmth. Like so. And what will set off this foreground is that it's not just a pile of rocks, it's out in nature. And so I'm going to touch into my sap green and my sepia with my fan brush. And I like to start by getting some of that heavy pigment off of it. I usually keep my test paper next to me, and I practice with my fan brush a little bit before I hit the painting with it. See where it's got so much pigment, so much water that there's no distinctive brush strokes until I get a little bit of that out. Now I can go in behind these rocks a little bit and have some of that grass or vegetation showing. What I define by the bottom of my brush, where I start my fan stroke, is I can define the edge of a rock that way. So let's see if I can show you what I mean. Let's say down here, there's a lighter area and it's darker, there's a darker strip above it. If I start right where that light area is, I can help define that as a rock right there. And I wanted it in this area partly because I'm helping to frame my overall painting. This dark and the dark here help kind of bring people into this painting a little bit. I can tell I need a little dark up in this spot for the same reason. I want to have my design and my pattern of values, in other words, the darks and the lights. I want to really have them lead my viewer's eye. And my path is come up with these rocks with me and let's go past that fence and look at those trees. That's the journey I'm taking him on. The poet Rumi wrote, "Today, like every other day, we wake up empty and frightened. Don't open the door to the study and begin reading. Take down a musical instrument. Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground." I hope that starting with the foreground helps you create some really textured, rich, bold, striking foregrounds in your paintings. Take some risks and experiment with that textury foundation to your whole painting. Up next, some more tricks for breaking the rules in watercolor. Hi, I'm Bob. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you'll go by my website at watercolorwithbob.com. That's where you'll find an interactive outline of the whole course. You can also share your work with me and your fellow students. One thing I really love about watercolor is how accessible it is. That's why I realized it was important to me to put this course out for free. That said, it would mean the world to me if you would support this work. You can like it, you could share it with your friends, you could subscribe to the channel, you could also visit the gift shop or even make a donation. Thanks so much. See you on the next lesson and happy painting. You know, this painting is going to be worth a lot of money when I die.